May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. We have some wonderful readings today. The theme of the day is calling and following. Usually I begin sermons with a metaphor, a story that has a little bit of humor and speaks to us about the gospel reading from a little bit different perspective. But today that's not necessary, because the story of Jonah and that really big fish that swallowed Jonah is a metaphor for calling and following. The book of Jonah opened abruptly. Yahweh said, "Jonah, up." And then he tells Jonah to go to Nineveh, a huge city that has fallen into despicable ways. Jonah is supposed to proclaim to the whole city of Nineveh that their wickedness has provoked Yahweh's anger, and now Nineveh will be destroyed. For the people of Nineveh, this would definitely not be good news. So upon hearing God's plan, Jonah did the logical thing. He ran away. Jonah's decision to run imperiled his life and the lives of sailors with him on a boat. In the midst of a terrible storm, the sailors realize that Jonah's presence on the boat has caused the storm. And so they do the logical thing. They throw Jonah overboard. But Jonah, it turned out, was not a fantastic swimmer. So God intervened. A great fish swallowed Jonah, and Jonah remained inside the great fish until he called out to Yahweh. Once Jonah was on dry land, God spoke again. "Up, go to Nineveh and preach to it as I tell you." This time, Jonah did the illogical thing. He followed the calling and went. During 2024, we'll hear a lot from the Gospel of Mark. This gospel stands out from the other four gospels. It is the first one written, the shortest gospel, and the only one written before the temple was destroyed. Mark's worldview is distinct among the gospel voices. We will hear a sense of urgency in his words, an implied inquiry. Are you with Jesus or not? The historical period between Jesus' resurrection and the destruction of the temple was turbulent. There was frustration with the Roman oppression, and the Romans were increasingly frustrated with the zealots, religious rules unique to Judaism, and this new group of people following something called the Way. Jerusalem was a ticking time bomb, and time was running out. So whereas Jonah's calling is an elaborate story with colorful characters and even a vomiting fish, Mark presents the calling of the first four disciples in one brief paragraph. In the few words Mark chose, he told us a lot about Jesus, about calling, and about following. Mark sets the scene. Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee. He sees Peter and Andrew fishing. He calls to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately, they abandon their nets and follow. I've often wondered about that scene. Fishing for people is unusual imagery. I wonder what it meant to Peter and Andrew. I wonder if they knew they were the first two fish in Jesus' net. Next, Jesus sees James and John, who were working in a boat with their dad. He called them. They left their dad in the boat and followed. There's something compelling about Jesus that is not obvious from the words he speaks. It becomes obvious because of the response to his words. He says, "Follow me." Peter, Andrew, James, and John follow, but not one of them speaks a single word. They don't ask any questions. We would want to know some things, like, how long will we be gone? Will we be back in time for supper? Do I need a charger for my cell phone? Unlike Jonah, the disciples do not run away. They do the illogical thing. They follow. The subtext of Mark's calling story is important. From the moment Jesus takes up his ministry, some people, not all, hear his voice through a lens of faith. They follow, even though they are filled with unspoken and unanswered questions. They follow, and the pilgrimage to resurrection begins. We are part of that pilgrimage, too. Throughout the life of St. Christopher's Episcopal Church, many people have walked this pilgrimage here. None of us are here for all of it. All of us are here for some of it. Our lives are changed by those we encounter as we walk. Along the way, Marshall Amos joined the pilgrimage at St. Christopher's. His impact in this congregation and in the lives of those who knew him well is meaningful. Early in our relationship, Marshall told me emphatically that he did not want to have a burial service when his time came. We disagreed on his reasoning, and so we revisited this topic many times. Marshall died on the eve of his 96th birthday, December 30th of 2023. Today we are celebrating his life in the midst of our Sunday worship. This is a compromise that meets his desire to not be overly recognized, and it meets our desire to give thanks to God for the time we shared with Marshall. Without Marshall, we would not be here in this physical place. At the beginning of his career as a civil engineer, Marshall was recruited by the city of Fort Worth to be its head of engineering. A gentleman named Erwin Krause imagined a new neighborhood in the southwest portion of Fort Worth. Mr. Krause formed an entity called Wedgwood Enterprises. He went to the city to obtain permission to proceed with his development, and the city's engineer, Marshall Amos, turned him down. Eventually, Mr. Krause earned the necessary permits to move forward with his project. But he was so impressed by Marshall during the negotiation with the city, after the deal was done, he hired him away from the city of Fort Worth. And eventually, he would make him a 50-50 partner in Wedgwood Enterprises. Together, they platted Wedgwood neighborhoods, including the property on which St. Matthew's Lutheran Church is built. They named all those streets that begin with the letter W. They named so many streets with W's that the fire department told them they had to stop it. It was creating confusion in the emergency response system. I visited Marshall many times over the past 18 months, and we shared stories about our roots, and he often shared stories from today's Wall Street Journal. Marshall wasn't one to speak emotionally, but it was clear to me that he cared deeply about this congregation, and this congregation cared about him. Twice, as I was leaving the elevator from having visited him, I encountered Ken Monroe coming in to have lunch with him. He was visited regularly by all of us. To follow Jesus is to see the world differently, not just through a logical mind, but also through a lens of faith. It is to know that our path leads to a new way of life, to resurrection, to life abundant and the eternal expanse of God's love. I am grateful for your witness of faithful pilgrimage in this community. May Marshall's soul and the souls of all the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen.